Attorney General.
Mr. Vice President, honourable members, thank you very much for this opportunity this afternoon to contribute to this, my first substantive budgeted debate in the upper house. I'm grateful to the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, for inviting me to serve the people in the capacity as Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. I go on record also to say thank you to my predecessor in office, the Honourable Faris Al-Rawi, for his 7 years of service in this capacity. His well-documented accomplishments must not go unacknowledged. He has laid a platform from which the team of bright and enthusiastic public servants in the ministry which I now lead can move forward. Mr. Vice President, I take the opportunity also to thank the Honourable Minister of Finance and his staff for the well-thought-out and robust financial platform laid out. The Honourable Minister's presentation on Monday, the 26th of September, was measured, truly mindful of what is necessary for our current national efforts in the global landscape. I sincerely thank him. I acknowledge as well and thank the very able support of the Minister of Planning and Development in her contribution to that effort. Madam President, the role of the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago comes with significant constitutional responsibilities, duties, and obligations, and is integral to the whole of government and of good governance. I must acknowledge the various statutory bodies, departments, and units under the remit of my office, all of who have underwritten my contribution today with the work that they devotedly undertook year-round to ensure that this Parliament and this august House is adequately equipped with sound legislation for the overarching benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I wish to go on record to pay particular tribute to Permanent Secretary Natasha Barrow for her leadership and dedication to this country, to the ministry which I now lead, and for her unstinted support of this novice public servant now serving as Attorney General since I have assumed office. I sincerely thank her for her sterling support and a very able leadership of a very dedicated team of public servants in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. A significant body of the ministry's work, Madam President, is generated particularly from the Law Reform Commission, headed by Mrs. Charlene Brasso-Taylor, and the Legislative Drafting Department, headed by Mr. Ian McIntyre, Senior Counsel, and whom I thank as well, driven by my office, other ministries, and valued stakeholders, and who on our behalf I am truly indebted. Madam President, through my office and the Legislative Review Committee, this government intends to introduce a suite of legislation targeting a cross-section of national, societal, and civic issues, all for the betterment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The government places top priority, Madam President, on the need to drive economic activity and, as recognized and saluted by the Honourable Minister of Finance, to improve the ease of doing business for companies, entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises, and artisans. I will be bringing to Parliament as one of the first items of my legislative agenda and one of my top priorities the Arbitration Bill, which provides for a modern legal framework to facilitate domestic and international trade and commerce by encouraging the internationally accepted alternative dispute resolution process of arbitration as a means of resolving disputes centered on the aim of assisting in turning Trinidad and Tobago into a genuine commerce destination. Madam President, there are other participating elements of a country which is dedicated to doing business, ease of doing business, and in that capacity and in that context, I also want to acknowledge and to declare to this Honourable House that my ministry is in active consultation with the Honourable Minister of Labour, the Honourable Stephen McClashy, on proposed amendments to the Industrial Relations Act and the Trade Unions Act, which have emerged from a fulsome national consultation, and that too will be part of my legislative agenda to continue to ensure a stable economic and workplace environment. Our human environment, Madam President, in the context of a safe and secure citizenry, is also very important. And I will touch on a number of aspects of that, but I would wish to place on record as a matter of priority the considerable amount of work which has gone before both houses relative to the sensitive issue of protecting our women and children. The dignity of our women and girls is of paramount importance. And permit me to remind the citizens of this country and of this House of the Sexual Offences Amendment No. 3 Bill 2021, which was laid in the Senate on the 11th of January 2022 and sent to a special select committee. The report from that committee was laid in the Senate on the 14th of June 2022 and is a piece of legislation aimed at keeping pace with the need not only to protect the vulnerable, but to update laws to respond to novel methods of criminality. The bill, which I will be bringing to this House, creates the offense of voyeurism and the taking and sharing of intimate images. These are offenses that are of a wide scope and anticipate types of behavior by which someone is caught viewing or sharing images of a person or child who had a reasonable expectation of privacy and engaging in a private act. In our current technological and widespread accessibility and use of social media, it is the hope of this government that following the consideration of this report, which is under active consideration in the Legislative Review Committee of my ministry, this bill will come to this House for passage and debate. And intended to join this bill is the Sexual Harassment Bill, which seeks to provide for measures to deal with sexual harassment and to provide redress for sexual harassment in the workplace. And I say that in particular answer today to the remarks of my honourable colleague, Senator Thompson Ahi, who particularly worked on and called for that particular piece of legislation. Madam President, it is a reality that we have to face the fact that we have a level of criminality in our country which requires the collective and collaborative efforts of several state agencies, in respect of which my office is intent on ensuring that it does its part to counteract this issue. The legislative agenda for the upcoming 2022-23 year also encompasses a number of pieces of legislation which will address the incidence of crime and criminality in this country, among which will be amendments to the Firearms Act. In the amendments under consideration, my office is actively looking at measures to better provide for the safety and security of our citizenry as we go about our normal lives in our homes, to and from our workplaces, and for the better regulated use of firearms, including better protection to our protective services as they continue in the discharge of their duty to keep our citizenry safe. The proposed amendment to the Firearms Act is in direct response to, among other things, the recent and disturbing trend which sees the brutal public executions of serving prison officers. This bill will empower the Commissioner of Prisons to grant permission to a prison officer to have in his possession a firearm or ammunition while off duty and in any public place where the Commissioner of Prisons considers that the life or safety of the officer is under threat by members of the public. The amendments will work with other regulatory improvements intended to be made to the Firearms Act to increase the licensing fees, as well as to provide further regulation for the possession and ownership of assault weapons. These measures are ancillary to a wider exercise on firearms, which is also engaging the attention of my office. Another tool intended to join the crime-fighting armory is the Controlled Deliveries Bill 2022, which will provide for the authorization, conduct, and monitoring of controlled sting operations intended to form part of the arsenal of crime-fighting tools for the police. And also under consideration are proposed amendments to the Interception of Communications Act. It remains my intention, as I've undertaken to do in another place, and my office has scheduled a comprehensive review and reform of the bail system and bail legislation, which we will be bringing back to this Parliament, informed by consultation from a socio-psychological and criminological perspective and with other relevant stakeholders. That is not to say, Madam President, that we must be inured to the plight of persons who run foul of the law and who get incarcerated in our prisons. And it is the need, in my respectful view and that of our government, that we need to ensure that the hardened criminal elements are appropriately and proportionately targeted and balanced by the need to effectively prepare those persons who have served their time to be rehabilitated for re-entry into our society. Through the combined effect of the Administrative of Justice Parole Bill and the Probation of Offenders Amendment Bill, it is envisaged that there will be improved options for convicted prisoners who have served their time. These options, when worked in tandem with other rehabilitative efforts in Trinidad and Tobago's prison services, will see, we expect, a positive impact on the recidivism rate. The Criminal Records Bill 2022 governs the rehabilitation of offenders who have committed minor offenses, and that bill will provide for the expunging of an individual's criminal record once he or she has satisfied the prescribed criteria during the relevant rehabilitation program. That rehabilitation conversation has been ongoing for decades, informed by the need to ensure that persons do not need to walk the rest of their lives with the stigma of a conviction for a minor offense, and it is my promise to give life to this bill within the upcoming legislative year. Rehabilitation is not limited to nor circumscribed by only our national borders, and we have a very unfortunate reality that although outside of our borders is part of our recurring reality in this society. And I speak of the alarming trend which began around 2018 when several young Trinidadian men and their spouses departed these shores in support of ISIS. The harsh reality following from that is that there are now a significant number of men and women, of children, and women, of Trinidadian descent and nationality who are left stranded abroad in unknown territories. My office is working on what will be called the Returnee Bill 2022, which aims to provide a regulatory framework to facilitate the return and management of persons from areas of conflict, and that too is a piece of legislation that we will be bringing to this House. There are, of course, other bills that have been in the last Parliament, what we refer to as the rollover bills. There is the Miscellaneous Provisions Criminal Proceedings Bill, which we will be bringing back to effectively abolish the year-and-a-day rule and double jeopardy. And we are also going to be bringing back the Miscellaneous Testing and Identification Bill 2022, a critical bill to ensure for the continued accountability and transparency of members of law enforcement as it aims to introduce a regulatory framework for polygraph, drug testing, and biometric identification for members of the Protective Service. This is yet another tool of the government continuously working to improve public confidence in the functioning of this country's systems. The criminal justice system requires continued attention and improvement, and some of the pieces of legislation which this government will be bringing to this Parliament include the Miscellaneous Trial by Judge Alone Bill 2022, which will introduce as the default option for criminal trials the use of judge-only trials for capital and non-capital indictable matters. The accused persons retaining, of course, the option for judge and jury trial. There will be proposed amendments to the Administration of Justice Indictable Proceedings Act, and we will see the return to Parliament to have this law settled with some finality to allow for the abolition of preliminary inquiries, which will be replaced by sufficiency hearings. The Justices of the Peace Bill 2022, which will prescribe for the appointment, functions, duties, and liabilities of Justice of the Peace and prescribe a code of conduct for which Justices of the Peace must adhere. Proposed amendments as well to the Evidence Act, which will allow for greater protection of witnesses as much needed adjustment in these times of increasing criminality. But societal and legislative reform, Madam President, is not to be limited only to the criminality that, unfortunately, we have to address in our society. So we will, with equal priority, be bringing legislation to this House aimed at protecting the more vulnerable members of our society. Bills such as the Senior Citizens Pension Amendment Bill, intended to update and modernize the Senior Citizens Pension Scheme and to complement the proposed increase of the age of retirement from 60 to 65 years, giving our very knowledgeable and experienced senior citizens the opportunity to continue to contribute to our society. Earlier this week, Senator Paul Richards and today Senator Thompson Ahi expressed concern about persons with disabilities, and I'm able to reassure our colleague senators that the International Law and Human Rights Unit of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs is currently engaged with a joint project between PAHO and World Health, funded by United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Multi-Partner Trust Fund. AGLA, that is to say the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Mr. Ian Rampasad, head of our unit, sits as chair of the Legislative Review Subcommittee, which is currently looking at the Equal Opportunity Act, the Mental Health Act, and Education Act, with a view to amendments to further protect the rights of persons with disabilities. And I'm able to assure Senator Richards and Senator Thompson Ahi that my ministry is in full support of the Ministry of Social Development, which is currently examining working on draft disabilities legislation. Of course, Madam President, with the need to protect the elderly and the disabled is the equal need, the urgent need to ensure that we continue to promote and protect the youth of Trinidad and Tobago. The National Youth Development Agency of Trinidad and Tobago Bill is intended to provide for the establishment of the agency, which pairs with the efforts of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service to ensure that the School to Work Apprenticeship Allowance Program has a pivotal impact on the youth of Trinidad and Tobago and their assured future. Ease of doing business, a central component of the Honourable Minister of Finance's budget speech, includes the fact that consumers are key contributors to our economy, and their protection is of the utmost importance to this government. As such, the Consumer Protection and Safety Bill is also included in the upcoming legislative agenda. This bill intends to establish a framework that consolidates in one place key consumer protection rights exercisable in relation to the supply of goods and services. The legislation will also provide for duties and obligations of suppliers and set out administrative and legal framework for the identification of violations involving the supply of goods or services, the physical and financial security of customers, unfair trade practices and transactions, and unfair contract terms. It will see a complete overhaul and modernization of the current Consumer Protection and Safety Act, Chapter 82, number 34. Madam President, policies are currently being developed through the Secure Transactions Bill with the aim of an enabling environment for businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Consideration is being given to policy recommendations aimed at developing a unified legislative governing scenario with the creation of security interests and a centralized electronic registry. Additionally and importantly, the National Statistics Institute of Trinidad and Tobago Bill and regulations to accompany it are intended to provide for thorough reform and centralization of the collection of national statistical information through the establishment of a national statistical institute. In this critical age of metadata, the introduction and passage of this bill in the upcoming year is key to realizing, among other things, the need to develop an independent management approach that fosters sound statistical methodologies, professional data compilation, and dissemination practices within the public sector and other state agencies as required under Theme 2, Good Governance and Service Excellence, National Development Strategy, Vision 2030. This is one measure aimed at improving public confidence in government structures. Madam President, these respective pieces of legislation are all to ensure that there is a marked improvement in the quality of life being experienced by our citizenry on a daily basis across the country. It is due to the need for concision that I can't detail every legislative matter under the header of societal interest reform, but these that I have mentioned are certainly a top priority for the government. It is clear, Madam President, that the government will be coming with a full legislative agenda carded for the upcoming session, and the proposed bills which I have referred to cover an array of key areas of national interest. It remains for me to identify some of the areas in which my ministry and the team of young, committed professionals are already engaged in a significant exercise of improving the services available to this country and the citizens' lives of this country. We can be proud as the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to record, as I announced today, that in May 2022, I received a call from the Attorney General of Belize, Senator the Honourable Magali Marin Young, who reached out to me to express keen interest and the priority of her government to visit Trinidad and Tobago in order to be familiarized with what she had heard of in terms of our systems and procedures in the registry of the Land, Building and Property Registry of Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular the digitization of that registry, our Registrar General's Department under the leadership of Mrs. Karen Bridgewater, as well as the digitization of our Intellectual Property Office under the leadership of Mr. Regan Asgarali. Why? She explained that she wished to experience firsthand the evidence that she had heard of the workings of the excellent digitization accomplishments which she understood had been completed within our RGD and IPO departments of the ministry. She arrived here on the 24th of July, 2022, spent a week, and was taken through both the Registrar General's Department by Mrs. Bridgewater and her team of very competent staff, and Mr. Asgarali, our IPO controller, and received real-time presentations of the talented, enthusiastic, and incredibly impressive members of staff of those departments. I was with her in the Registrar General's Department at the counter on the ground floor of the tower of the Ministry of the Attorney General when she witnessed the actual over-the-counter reality of members of the citizenry of our beloved country coming in the normal course of a day, applying for and receiving their birth and death certificates real-time, right there and then in front of her. She left this country particularly impressed with the work of the registries under the remit of the Registrar General and the Controller of the Intellectual Property Office, and to this day continues to consult with the ministry as she builds out improvements for the Attorney General's chambers of Belize, patterned off of the working examples of the competence, talent, and build out of the reality of our work in the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. My colleague, Senator Thompson Ahi.
Yes. I heard you speak of a number of pieces of legislation you want to bring, but in respect of legislation that has already been passed in the House and not been implemented, and I speak specifically about the Home for Older Persons Act of 2007, almost 16 years old. Do you have any plans to, bring that on stream? It's the older person, and many of them have died while we're waiting for the regulations.
Thank you for that, Senator Thompson-Ahi, and that is certainly something that I am in discussions with the Minister of Social Development, and no doubt you will be getting appropriate updates on that as we progress through this legislative agenda. Thank you. Madam President, if I may continue, and just to touch on some of the areas in which the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs continues to work. I've already mentioned the real-time example of the land registry. We have the property business registration system of the Registrar General's Department, which allows real-time digital access to land title documents. We have the land document e-filing application in that registry, digital certified copies being available to members of the public. Within the first fortnight of my appointment as Attorney General, I was privileged to be taken on a tour of the land registry archives in the basement of the Attorney General's ministry and to see firsthand the remarkable work of the exceptionally competent staff of that department, the Registrar General's Department, who have digitized records, some handwritten books, Madam President, dating back to the 1700s. I witnessed those books on shelves in the basement of the Attorney General, Registrar General's Department, some as large as wide as, and as long as the desk at which Madam President sits, and 8 to 10 inches in depth, consisting of pieces of paper that date back to the 1700s that are incapable of being easily managed anymore, but contain the records of our land transactions, which are so important for the search titles that have to assure the quality of ownership going into the future. And I witnessed the young people, very proud, carefully scanning those pages of those pieces of paper, 1,700, and coming forward and creating digitized records which allow us now to do online searches to assure the quality, the impeccable quality of our land titles. That allows me, Madam President, immediately to use a colloquial expression, to segue to an important development that is also taking place, supported by the digitization capability of the Registrar General's Department. That is to say, the work of the single point of authority. In the period 2015 to 2017, 3 reports of this Parliament's Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure focused on state land management, as well as a review of decades-old state land distribution policy, a system that has been in disarray for a considerable period of time. In October 2020, Madam President, Cabinet appointed a steering committee comprising members from various ministries and agencies with responsibility for land. The terms of reference of that steering committee are to develop a plan and report to the Cabinet on a single point of authority for the management and administration of state land owned and controlled by state agencies using the existing human resources and infrastructure of the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries and other agencies of the state. Madam President, the steering committee on the single point authority recommended to Cabinet in 2021 an IT-based single point of authority to be established within the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries Land Management Division. And that single point authority is now working with the Ministry of the Attorney General, assisted and supported by the Registrar General's Department. And that single point authority is now looking to identify critical elements of AGLA's support for the work of that single point authority in 3 specific areas: legislative changes to support interoperability among state entities for data sharing, changes to the State Land Act and other legislation to modernize the management and administrative functions of state land management, as well as enforcement mechanisms and streamlining the relationships with the Chief State Solicitors and Registrar General's departments of the Ministry of the Attorney General, in line with the digital transformation work already underway at the Ministry, at the Registrar General's department. So we have a marriage of state agencies working together with that which is already in place at the Registrar General's department to build out the work of that single point authority. Madam President, the work of the Companies Registry continues in the companies in implementing provisions of the Companies Act and amendments to that legislation to allow for private companies on the register of companies to disclose the beneficial owners holding interests in the company. And that is something that is being worked on as we speak. There is also the ease of business approach, all information required for the incorporation of companies, as well as the registration of external companies and business names being submitted online using the TT BizLink e-company registration service, which forms part of the single electronic window operated by the Ministry of Trade for accessing Trinidad and Tobago government services. What I'm speaking of here, Madam President, is the whole of government approach which the Ministry of the Attorney General is employing to partner with other ministries to enable the citizenry of this country to benefit from enhanced services and more secure transactions. Madam President, CROSS, that is to say, the Companies Registry online system intended to replace TT BizLink platform so as to create a paperless system to provide for user-friendly remote access on a 24-hour basis. These are just examples of works in progress that are moving forward as we speak. The Intellectual Property Office, time will not permit me, to be perfectly honest, to detail the remarkable work that is being done by that office. My colleague, Senator Vera, on the other side of the independent bench, will have an intimate working appreciation of that office because it is an area that he does a lot of work in. And it is under the leadership, the proud leadership of a young man by the name of Mr. Regan Asgarali, to whom I pay tribute today for his very robust and stout leadership. Among the accomplishments of the Intellectual Property Office include the granting of intellectual property rights, the determination of opposition hearings, making intellectual property information available to the public, receiving international applications under the Patent Cooperation Treaty, advising the government on intellectual property matters, promoting public awareness, and of course, promoting inventiveness amongst the creative citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. In calendar year 2021, the unaudited gross revenue for the Intellectual Property Office amounted to $6,263,700, a significant increase from 2020 and setting a new record high crossing of the $6 million mark for the first time in the history of intellectual property in this country. Madam President, the Solicitor General's department is critical, as we all know, to the administration of justice in Trinidad and Tobago. It provides legal services to the state in every area of criminal law except criminal law. I beg your pardon. The Solicitor General's department deals with several matters ranging from litigation matters, advisory matters, membership on negotiating teams and delegations on behalf of the government, vetting and/or preparation of documents relating to international law, dealing with and briefing overseas counsel and solicitors in London and elsewhere, and counsel appearing on behalf of the state before the Privy Council and in the original jurisdiction even of the Caribbean Court of Justice, to which jurisdiction we will in due course be acceding at the appellate level, my enduring hope. Time will not permit me, Madam President, to detail the work of the Solicitor General's department, but I will want to acknowledge, before I pass on, the considerable contribution of Solicitor General Ms. Carol Hernandez, who is now on pre-retirement leave. And I look forward to the Judicial and Legal Service Commission moving swiftly to appoint her successor from within the ranks of the very competent members of staff of that department, several of whom are very deserving of being promoted to fill her very able shoes. Madam President, the Chief State Solicitor's Department, led by the very competent senior attorney, Mr. Sean Julian, who leads an equally experienced and competent team of attorneys, many of whom I know personally, having worked with them when I was in private practice. Again, time will not permit me to detail the extent of the very invaluable service and work of these exceptionally competent and hard-working attorneys. Safe to identify that that department includes the offices of the Public Trustee, the Administrator General, the official receiver, whose remit we have only last legislative term increased the remit of, custodian of enemy property, ex officio member of the Central Tenders Board. May I also acknowledge the positive impact of the ministry's digitization unit under the very able leadership of Ms. Sandra Keshi, and with whom I've had the privilege to work since assuming office, and indeed the work that they have been doing on payment vouchers, payment record cards, registers, schedule of accounts. I could go on, Madam President, but I'm not going to take up the limited time that I have left, other than to go on record to let Ms. Keshi and my very able permanent secretary, who has been working with me on the digitization exercise, to know that very recent developments now make an imminent reality the outfitting of the 20th floor of the Attorney General's tower to completely outfit the work of that digitization unit.
Attorney General, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, that takes me to acknowledge the work of the Attorney General's Secretariat, led by the exceptional Ms. Tanil Ramkisoon. Under her leadership, the Secretariat provides an incredibly invaluable link and supreme quality work output and driving force to the coordination of very complex and important litigation and advice in different units and departments of the Attorney General's ministry, not least the Solicitor General and Chief State Solicitor's Department. It is not my style to single out persons, because that always involves the individual risk of failing publicly to acknowledge individuals who are equally deserving of mention, but I think it important to acknowledge some of those persons who I have just named, and I'm happy to acknowledge the work of those members of the Attorney General's ministry that have already been acknowledged by the Honourable Minister Sagram Singh Suklal, Minister in the ministry, who spoke before me and identified the very able and hard work of very important units: anti-terrorism, criminal justice unit, international law and human rights, child abduction, and central authority, and the leaders of those particular units. Vision 2030, Madam President, is a central part of the whole of government digital transformation. And a key component of this government's vision for Trinidad and Tobago is a digitally transformed society. We have heard from my colleague, Senator Hasselbackus, on the collaborative and partnership role that his Ministry of Digital Transformation plays within the government. And I am able to tell the country that the whole of government approach of this government includes the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs working collaboratively with Minister Backus, so that areas which we are currently working on as part of the Attorney General's legislative agenda include but are not limited to the Cybercrime Bill, Telecommunications Act amendments, Broadcast Code, electronic transaction, electronic signature regulations, draft national identity legislation, and proclamation of sections of the Data Protection Act and proposals for amendments of that Act and draft data protection regulations. Madam President, it has been a privilege for me to be able to stand here this afternoon to speak to the remarkable privilege which I have been given to lead what is a very competent, hard-working team of very able, dedicated professionals, from the security staff who welcome me every morning I arrive at the ministry to when I leave in the evenings. And I am grateful for the opportunity to serve this country through that very accomplished ministry. And permit me to say one last bit, Madam President, in closing. I have accepted an invitation of the Honourable Prime Minister to serve this country. And I would use this opportunity to appeal to members of this House and to members of the other House to join with me in an effort to better the people of this country. I will not pretend that I have not been taken aback by some of the remarkable, almost venom that I have witnessed being expressed in this House and in the other House. I personally think it is unnecessary, it is unfortunate, and I think it betrays the hopes and aspirations of this republic that we should come to this chamber and to the other chamber and do anything other than commit to the future generations of this country. And I invite all members, I pay tribute to the independent bench, and I invite all members on the other side not to see me as an enemy. I am not your enemy. I am here to work with you in collaboration for the betterment of the people of this country. Thank you very much.
Minister of Finance.